Hey, everybody. My name is Matt Woodruff. I am an assistant professor at Emory University. I'm also a co-host of the podcast Audio Immunity. Those of you that have been watching the Audio Immunity, still can't say it, Kevin. Audio Immunity YouTube channel know that we've been doing, our normal podcast thing, which is kind of fun, but also we've been updating you on science policy and the way that it affects Emory locally. The CDC is up the street, as you may have heard me talk about, but also sort of more globally how those policy changes are influencing science. And Kevin, actually, you uploaded your first video the other day, and so I think this would be fun, sort of have a conversation about this together today.
Yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm Kevin Bonham. I'm an assistant professor at Tufts Medical Center. And I uploaded a video about sort of the framing around all of this craziness as, being savings, when in fact it's probably going to cost us a lot more money as a society. But yeah, we can get into that.
Sure. Yeah, so we don't have to go back to all of the policy changes. I think we've had a couple videos posted, and actually our last full Audio Immunity episode, we talked about science policy changes for about 40 minutes up in front of the episode, so go back, take a look at that. Also, there's a fun discussion about some actual immunology at the end.
Yeah, I swear that the future episodes we're going to try to stick more to actual science, but it's hard in these times.
Yeah, maybe we'll take the policy stuff and try to put it into this format so people can follow along. So one of the major efforts that I have been trying to make since starting to upload these videos is just keeping people abreast, as I said before, about what's going on here locally within Emory, because obviously I have some insight into that people may not have. And the CDC, like I said, is up the street. So we're watching layoffs and people coming out of that building pretty beaten up. So I wanted to relate, and Kevin, it sounds like you have a similar story to tell. I wanted to relate that we got an email yesterday telling us that all new faculty/staff hiring is frozen. The justification for that is essentially we don't know what funding is going to look like. We have no clear sense of how the policies that have been attempted to be implemented are going to affect the way that we do science. We don't know if the federal judges' injunctions routinely are actually going to hold, whether the NIH is going to abide by those injunctions, whether money is going to continue to flow. But at this point, it's created enough uncertainty where essentially the university has said, until we know more, until there's more clarity, we will not be able to hire folks. So in our department meeting today, we have a faculty recruit that is supposed to come, literally tomorrow, and it is not clear that person is actually going to get on a plane and come here. And if they do, it's not clear what we'll be able to tell that individual. So,
yeah, actually, I at the moment we are recording, I was scheduled to meet with a faculty candidate to be hired under the same cluster hiring initiative that I got hired under. Just a month ago, and that person's seminar and visit was canceled because Tufts decided that this cluster hire is going to have a freeze. Thankfully, here at the medical center, I think maybe I don't know, the differences between the hospital and the university are a little bit unclear, but we don't have a blanket hiring freeze. So I'm still working on hiring, my first person or people for my lab. But yeah, those faculty hires have been canceled because they, understandably, they want to support the people that are currently here. They want to make sure that, if there are pauses in funding, that it doesn't cause people to need to, close their labs. As you might imagine, starting up a lab is, there's a lot of sort of inertia, and if you have to shut a lab down, it's not this kind of thing that you can just stop and start, from month to month. So I think they want to.
It's like starting a business, right?
Yeah.
You get excited. You put out messaging. You start to identify the people that are going to sit at the core of your new business. You start to develop a product. All of that stuff, and just shutting that down. Think about all the restaurants that were trying to get started, and then COVID came. Right? It's the same thing. And
Yeah.
The thing that I wanted to bring up around all of this too was, we've been discussing fairly frequently about the impact on NIH employees, the NIH workforce, CDC employees, NSF employees. So one of the sort of knock-on effects that this kind of hiring freeze has across university systems is as those federal employees with sometimes literal decades worth of biomedical research experience are getting kicked out of the workforce for no obvious reason, it's not clear where they go, right? Now, some people would argue that they should go into just private pharma. And I have to say that this has been a frustrating conversation a couple times that I've had to have with folks, which is, why does it need to be in the academic space? Why can't we just, push a little towards private business? We can make sure that we're keeping an eye on translational approaches to science and all of this. And so I want to relate a story briefly, which is that the a major component of my lab is around mRNA vaccination. We've got some cool ideas about sort of next generation vaccines that we think can generate broad protection across multiple strains of a bunch of different pathogens like SARS-CoV-2 or influenza, for example. So imagine being able to get a shot that doesn't protect you for 1 year against influenza, it protects you year to year. So you can imagine that putting together these vaccines is not simple. There are folks that have developed a lot of rigorous expertise, and one of these groups is actually out on the West Coast, a group called AAHI. And AAHI, we've been working in partnership with for a while now, probably 2-3 years. And the relationship that we have is we design these vaccines. AAHI, as a non-for-profit dedicated to sort of supporting global health through research innovation, has basically taken those designs and manufactured them for us. And then they send them to us, and we do all of the
basically
testing.
At cost, right? I mean, like, if you had to go to a commercial company, this would be a lot more expensive.
And you wouldn't even be able to get it at a commercial company, right? We're talking about advanced materials and advanced understanding of how to assemble it all together, right? So highly specialized work. So it became known just the other day, and we found this out because the contact person that I've been working with over the past 5 years on this project was actually here at Emory giving a talk on short notice. And it turns out that that's because AAHI has shut down its entire mRNA vaccine arm. They fired everyone. And, you might be thinking, well, maybe it wasn't profitable. Maybe it was struggling. She's currently on the job market trying desperately to get a letter of intent from a university because she has till the end of March to take, from what I understand, nearly $40 million in NIH contracts with her. And if it doesn't come through by the end of March, my understanding is a lot of those contracts fall by the wayside, right? So what I understand to be true is that the reason that this has happened is not because the science wasn't going well. It was because the owner, the majority stakeholder of AAHI, seems to have a personal relationship with RFK Jr. And the understanding seems to be right now that RFK Jr. is not super excited about mRNA vaccines, and as a result, AAHI has decided to just shut down a productive arm of its science that currently has products in clinical trials that could be commercially viable, right? And that is why privatization of all science is a bad idea, right? Because you can't put a decade and a half's worth of work and investment in the hands of somebody that may or may not care about the actual eventual outcome of the project itself, right? You can't be that single-minded in your approach in order to do basic science well. I mean, the functional outcome of all of that is it's not clear if all of the good work that's been done over there is ever going to find its way out from behind intellectual property protection. So if all of those things fall away, I'm under a non-disclosure agreement. I can't tell you the conversations that I've had about those vaccines with AAHI, and I never will be able to, right? It's cool stuff about how mRNA vaccination can be better than it is, and it may not make it out into the world. right? Because of these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you said it's the reason. I think it's a reason. But there are a myriad others. I mean, we know a lot of things, and particularly a lot of things in public health and medicine that would be beneficial are not market priorities, right? So we know pharma right now is chasing like GLP-1 inhibitors because that's where a lot of money is. Sure, obesity is a problem, but it's not the only problem. It has been very hard over decades to get companies to research things like antibiotics, next generation antibiotics, because getting antibiotics through clinical trial pipelines is super expensive and not particularly profitable. But having more antibiotics that could treat antibiotic-resistant bugs would be a boon to public health, right? So there are lots of places where market incentives are great. They drive a lot of innovation, no shade on that. But there are also many places where we're not going to get the innovation if every single drug company is just chasing the most profitable things. mRNA vaccines by themselves were the product of decades of academic research going after this kind of obscure idea. If it was just up to businesses, it wouldn't be a good investment. But it was how we were able to generate a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine in under a year, right when the pandemic first hit. And so I think there is a really important place for pharma, and the U.S. is an engine of innovation around the world. But part of the reason that biomedical companies in the U.S. are so successful is because there's this pipeline of academic research, not only the ideas, but also the people that are trained in academia. And I think we've mentioned this, on previous videos like this, and also on the podcast, that the pipeline of people and ideas and technologies are in many ways driven by academic research and by government funding of that research for basic science that doesn't have obvious clinical application in the moment. And, a lot of those dollars are not going to necessarily end up being traceable to a particular drug, but some of them are. And many of those avenues are not going to be funded by pharma because it's not directly obvious where the profit is going to come from. And one example is those GLP-1 drugs. There's this great article showing that basically research into Gila monster venom was foundational to getting to GLP-1 drugs, right?
Yep.
There's no way that GlaxoSmithKline or Roche or any of these giant pharmaceutical companies would be researching Gila monster venom. But that's the kind of thing that we can do in academia. And yeah, a lot of times we say here are potential benefits, but a lot of times for a lot of basic science, we just don't know what the eventual outcome is. And we need government. I shouldn't say we need. Government funding is incredibly helpful to drive that innovation. And I've said this before too. Every dollar of NIH funding generates multiples of that in economic activity in states across the country. And pharmaceutical companies, private industry does fund some amount of research, and that's great. There was a history of companies funding more academic-like research institutions. That's cool too. That's a model that could be pursued. But this burning down of all biomedical research in the country it's not going to go well. I mean, for us personally, we're going to be directly affected by it, but in general, we're going to have less innovation. We're going to have less cures. We're going to have less understanding of health and disease, and that's going to affect everybody.
Yeah. No, and you don't know what you're losing, right? Which is why it's so easy to push policy like this, because you wipe it out and then nobody hears about it afterwards, because things happen, like all of the information that was lost now sits behind an IP wall. So I can't relate, in 2 years' time what we've missed, because it's evaporated. So the idea that private industry is going to make up for the fact that 10-15% right now of federal workforces in science is sort of laughable. And the point that you just made, I think, about companies' investment strategies, it's not just to kinds of questions, it's also to the people that they're going to market these drugs towards. And I bring that up because, the other thing that is sort of an elephant in the room right now was there was an address to Congress yesterday. One of the big things that came out was the idea that the NIH was spending billions of dollars on
making mice transgender.
Transgender mice.
We're making mice transgender.
Yeah. And so, there's a couple ways to take that argument. And there's the comical way, and I think that it is appropriate to point out that they simply misidentified in the case of a couple studies. Like, we use the words transgenic mice are mice where we take
There are 7 letters that are the same, Matt.
Yeah, I know. It's the whole front of the word is identical. So a transgenic mouse is a mouse that you've taken a gene from another place and you've put it into a mouse so that you can study the effect of that gene. It has nothing to do with sex. It has nothing to do with gender.
I think basically I've been listening to old episodes of Audio Immunity, and I'm reasonably certain that every single episode that we have recorded, possibly with 1 or 2 exceptions, has involved transgenic mice.
Right.
Because it's a fundamental technology for investigating the immune system, among many, many other things, right?
Right. So that was stupid. It's stupid. It's still on the it's on the White House's website. I found it today. That part of it's dumb. You can look at some of the other studies, though, and some of them do actually research what happens if you are providing hormones to an animal across its sex, and how does that affect the immune system? How does it affect neuronal development? All of those things. And here's the point that I want to make. It's easy to make sort of the laughing argument that they're dumb and they don't know what they're talking about. Yes, that's true.
It's way too easy to make that argument.
Yeah, and also, we shouldn't be erasing people, right? The point of science is to make sure that we understand the fundamental nature of biology. And when there are people that are living in circumstances that we don't understand, it is our obligation as scientists to investigate those things, right? I'm not willing to, I guess, stand behind the they're just stupid and they don't know what they say argument too long, because I think that the other side of that is actually more important, which is, yes, some of that research does directly address the idea that there are people in this country on hormone therapy, and those people, as taxpayers, deserve to have some of their tax dollars understand if when they get a vaccine they're going to respond correctly, right? Or they're going to respond robustly, or if there are going to be any unforeseen problems with that. This is a fundamental medical question, and I'm not interested in pretending like this should be off limits, right? I reject the premise of the argument that even if we were making mice transgender routinely, which we are obviously not, it is not silly to study the effects of biology in ways that we don't understand, right? And in part for exactly the reason you just said, we don't know what we're going to find, and it could be important even beyond the direct intention of what that study is.
100%. And, it's so challenging. There's this phrase called Mott and Bailey. Have you heard of this? It's a kind of argument style. So a Mott and Bailey is this medieval structure where you have the fortress, and then you have an open field where other things can happen that's less well defended. And the idea is this form of argument style where you make this like broad sweeping argument, and that if anybody pushes back, you just retreat to the like really secure place, like on the transgender issue, like people argue like, say like, well, it's complicated. Like people will argue like there's only two sexes, like, that just biological, blah, blah, blah. And then if you start to like talk about the nuance, they'll like come back to the like more supportive, well, like women in people who have gone through male puberty in women's sports, like they sort of retreat back to a more defensible argument. There are nuances to that argument too, but I feel like we're in this position as biomedical researchers where, like, if you say biological research is important, academic research is important, a critic can always come at you with the shrimp on treadmills, or find some example of some basic research that looks absurd on its face. And to argue against that, to make the positive case, is really complicated. It's very easy to say like, researching shrimp on treadmills is dumb.
Or fruit flies.
Or fruit flies. Yeah, like why
though-
would you care about, like, fruit flies are dumb. We just try to kill them. Like, all of that research is, and the positive argument for those particular projects is long and complicated. Which is the reason why when we apply for grants, they are evaluated by giant panels of scientific experts, right? Like, this is not, this research that you're discussing about giving hormones to mice, fruit fly research, even the shrimp on treadmills, like, they didn't just go to their friend at the NSF and say, hey, I want to research this BS thing, give me some money. No, they submitted an incredibly thorough grant, was reviewed by a panel of experts that said, of all the grants that we received, we have a small amount of money. This research is worth funding. And it should be noted, that money was appropriated by Congress, and all of the grants that have been funded are public.
Yep.
You can go to NIH Reporter, you can see every single grant that was ever funded, and you can see the details of what that grant is researching.
Yeah. And you could do that before January 21st, to be clear.
Yeah, you could do this for decades. And the problem with the current state of argumentation around this stuff, the politicization of this, is that it is easy to find examples of research that you personally would not fund. I can find that. I can go on NIH and say, I don't think I would have funded that grant. But it wouldn't be up to me. It would be up to a panel of experts that are evaluating and making use of limited dollars. Most grants that are written are not funded.
Yep.
I think the pay line at NIH for the last several years has been under 15%.
Yep.
And so this idea that we are saving money on fraud and abuse, it's absurd if you know anything about it, and it's incredibly disingenuous. The people making these arguments know that.
Yep.
What they are actually saying is that we want the power to decide where this money goes to be in our hands, not in the hands of scientific experts. They want a system where you have to be their friend. You have to give them a little kickback, like, hey, I'll research the pet project that you care about if you get me some. That's the system that they want.
Yep.
They don't want a system where there's an external source of authority and truth making these decisions.
Yeah.
That's just what it comes down to fundamentally.
Well, I have good news for you.
Tell me. I need
I
some.
successfully submitted my R01, my large research grant resubmission yesterday, and I am certain that it is currently sitting in the hole that the NIH used to exist over. And my hope is that someone trips over it and reads it someday.
Could happen. Could happen. In the meantime, I'm frantically Googling all of the private foundations. I'm sure, like every single other scientist in the U.S., is looking at all the private foundations, looking for any pots of money that could plausibly fund our research. So,
how many emails do you think that the Wellcome Trust Fund has received over the last 3 weeks?
Many.
Yeah,
a couple from me. So Yep. That's where we're at.
Good times. Well, thanks for jumping on here.
Yeah, of course.
As we mentioned at the start, we are co-hosts of the podcast Audio Immunity. That's AUDIO.
Along with Kate France, who doesn't want to who doesn't want to get involved in these politically, for good reason, to be clear. But
no, she has opted out, which is fine. But
spell it again. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. We are co-hosts of the podcast Audio Immunity. That's AUDIOMMUNITY. And you can either find us at audioimmunity.org or this video, of course, on the Audio Immunity channel on YouTube. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will continue keeping you updated as this sort of wild ride continues.
Bye, everyone.